They smashed my gate at midnight like it was a joke, angle grinders singing, headlights carving the dark, and a bunch of voices laughing like kids at a bonfire. Boone woke up barking, and I found myself standing on the porch with a coffee that had gone cold, watching my own driveway become somebody else's theater. I'd moved out to Willow Ridge to get away from noise and rules, not to become the plot in my neighbor's Sunday gossip. My name's Eli Mercer. I used to run a patrol detail in a city that taught me how patience and paperwork can be more dangerous than a fist fight. And after I left, I bought a little stretch of land with a shed, a porch, and a gravel lane marked as private on the deed, 3 words that, I thought, would be enough. For 2 years, it was. Boone and I would sit at dawn, watch the fog lift off the fields, and wave at the occasional neighbor. Then the shortcut problem started. Trucks gliding through like they owned the place, kids on dirt bikes who thought my mailbox was a target, and Prius drivers who figured my driveway saved them 5 minutes on a Tuesday. It was nothing at first: a knocked-over mailbox, a kid leaving a beer can, a neighbor blasting music past midnight, but the pattern felt personal, like an erosion. I put up signs, installed a camera, a modest setup, nothing dramatic, and wrote a polite letter to Pinecrest Ridge Homeowners Association explaining that the lane was deeded private and that trespassing would not be tolerated. I sent it certified. I kept the receipts. A week later, at a HOA meeting, Marla Dugan, the association president, stood up and said, with what looked like careful disdain, "Eli's gate is a community problem." She smiled like she'd just read the right paragraph from a script. That was the second time I understood the problem. When ownership becomes a claim and community becomes an argument. You can imagine my surprise when a maintenance crew arrived 2 days later with a flatbed and a crew of tough-looking men to inspect the lane. I asked for papers. One of them, a man named Ethan Crow, who wore a contractor's hoodie and an "I know a judge" attitude, said, "Marla wants it open. You can't stop people." I showed him the deed, the county plat, the notarized lines that marked my property, and he shrugged. "We're doing what the community needs." He said it like it was a favor. They cut the lock that afternoon and left the gate leaning, hinges twisted, like a throat cut in the night. That night they came back, and it wasn't just about cutting locks. They came with a generator, angle grinders, and a level of confidence I'd only seen once before in bad men with insurance. Boone barked until his voice went raw, and I stood in the doorway and listened while someone smashed a lantern and another voice said, "This will teach him." They yelled things, petty, vindictive phrases, and one of them spat on the name of my hometown like it justified what they were doing. I called the sheriff. He drove up an hour later, took a report, and drove away. The paperwork existed, the fix did not. So I did what any stubborn, small farm kind of guy does. I documented. I installed more cameras. I backed up footage to the cloud. I saved receipts, every interaction, every voicemail. I hired a young paralegal named Dana Sharp, impatient, and the kind of person who reads more subpoenas than she sleeps, and together we started pulling threads. What Dana found was not a mystery, just a pattern. Pinecrest Ridge had been funneling maintenance money to a handful of businesses, Ethan's included. In the ledger we found payments labeled roadwork and community upkeep that matched invoices with Marla's signature. It smelled like the kind of corruption movies make for 3-act climaxes, and like every good thriller, it smelled like dinner at the same table where the HOA held its meetings. There were confrontations, the kind that make good video for neighbors and bad decisions for the accused. At a public hearing, Marla said in a voice mixing feigned concern and steel, "We have to protect access for everyone." Ethan, when confronted, put on that contractor's half-smile and said, "Sometimes the community decides faster than the county." The word community kept surfacing like a shield. It was performative, a phrase to hide the ledger lines and the emails that said, plainly, "Make him stop." The turning point came when Dana dug up an audio file, a recording from a private Zoom call where Marla and a board member joked about making an example of the gate owner, and Ethan laughed while describing how easy it was to mobilize folks with nothing to lose. Hearing it was like watching lightning split a tree. The silence afterward held a strange, terrible clarity. Motive, control. Means, money and influence. Opportunity, a small, stubborn man on a private lane. I filed suit. Not a headline-grabbing vendetta, just a civil complaint with exhibits, timestamps, drone footage, bank transfers, and that Zoom recording. The suit said, plainly, that Pinecrest Ridge conspired to trespass, to damage property, and to harass. It cataloged a campaign of pressure that started with a complaint about a gate and turned into a coordinated effort to make me move or buckle. The HOA filed a counterclaim about community access, a word that now, more than ever, felt like a weapon. Once your fight becomes paper and precedent, strange things happen. Reporters sniffed around because the story checked a few boxes: rich neighbors, a David and Goliath vibe, and a dog named Boone who, it turned out, loved the camera. The county prosecutor opened an inquiry. A detective who'd grown up in the area, who'd once had coffee with my father, sat across from me and said, "Eli, sometimes people think the law bends for who they know." He had that look tired, like someone who'd seen the system get cozy with itself. He took our files and said he'd see what the DA thought. Court is a slow machine. We watched as lawyers moved pieces like chess, deposition transcripts, contested exhibits, objections thrown at the speed of boredom. Ethan's contractor license, which on paper was clean, suddenly looked less tidy when a former employee came forward to say the crew had been told, "You'll be paid whether the job is real or not." Marla's friendly tone on the phone became brittle in deposition. Her memory for dates was selective. At one point, as she sat under oath, she said, softly, "We were protecting the neighborhood." I looked at her and said, quieter than I meant to, "What you were protecting was a bank account." The courtroom climactic moment you see in movies came not with fireworks, but with a simple question from the judge. Did you authorize payments to Crow Enterprises for lane maintenance, while Mr. Mercer's property was clearly deeded private? The transcript is short. The answer, despite attempts to dance through semantics, was yes. The judge looked at the county plat, at our exhibits, and at Marla's face, and for a second it was like watching curtains part. The civil suit ended with a settlement that dissolved the HOA's authority to manage that lane, ordered repayment for damages, and included a public apology that read formal and yet tasted like victory. There were consequences beyond money. Ethan lost contracts when his practices were scrutinized. A few board members resigned, and Marla moved away a few months later, leaving behind a small stack of unanswered texts. For me, the cost was less tidy. Legal bills that could have paid for a decent tractor, sleep that never quite returned to the innocent sort, and a new awareness that property isn't only land, indeed it's a story people tell each other about who belongs and who doesn't. And yet, on a clear morning when the gate was back heavier, bolted into concrete, cameras attached like little sentries, Boone and I sat on the porch and watched a pickup slow down at the sign that now read, plainly, "Private lane trespassers will be prosecuted." A kid on a bicycle waved. I waved back. The world did not end. People still argued at HOA meetings elsewhere. Someone tweeted a take, and someone else replied with a counter. Life, like community, is messy. If there is a lesson, it's this: laws on paper matter, but so do the people who decide when to use them and when to look the other way. There are neighbors who will be helpful, neighbors who will lie, and systems that, if left unexamined, start to serve themselves. I am not pretending to be a martyr. I am a man who wanted peace and had to make noise to keep it. I learned how fragile quiet can be and how loud justice must sometimes get. So what would you have done? Would you have filmed, sued, and dragged a small-town HOA into public view? Or would you have sold the land and walked away? Do you think community means majority rule even when it hurts a neighbor? Or does community mean protecting the quiet rights of the few? Drop a comment below. Tell your story if you've lived through something like this. And if you liked hearing about Boone and the Gate, share this with someone who loves a good small-town showdown. If you think I was in the wrong, say so. I'll read it. I'll argue back maybe, and maybe we'll all learn something.